Tonight, as I said last week, our guest speaker is a very good friend of mine that I've known for many years, Frank Otero. Frank is the founder and CEO of the Paco Group, a company based here in New York City. They also have an office in Miami. The company was started in 1989, I think, Frank? 1989. So any company that has survived, that long, 36 years, with everything that's gone on in the industry and is still going strong, is still recognized as a leading firm. It's got to be pretty good. Paco Group, Frank will talk about it. The Paco Group serves just about one of the major agencies here in the city area. He'll tell you about the work that they do. But Frank is one of the industry's leading experts on configuration management.
It gives me the hope that as you get into the field and go to work at these agencies or the private sector, that you're going to be the change agents, because our industry needs change agents. Believe me, we are one of the least adaptive type of industries when it comes to technology and processes improvements. So that's how I got involved in starting my own company. Problem is that there's a misunderstanding of what configuration management is, okay? Some people think it's just change management, how contract changes, or document management. But I'll explain a little bit of the history of configuration management and why I became a disciple of configuration management. I'm passionate about it. Tim mentioned that my name is Frank Otero. I'm the founder, CEO, and president of the Paco Group. We're a program and construction management firm, full service. We do everything in terms of project control and related type services. We don't do any design work, okay? We basically help the agency during the planning, design, construction, bid award. We do value engineering, we do project risk, we do scheduling, estimating, cost control, office engineering, inspection, resident engineering, any of those related, except we don't do a design. We do design review, we do constructability review, but we do not sign drawings. And we only work for government agencies. We do not work for the private sector. That was a decision that was made a long time ago. We do work throughout the United States, and we've done work internationally as well. Okay? So we have a pretty good wide spectrum of work experience. We kind of always look at the project at the end, and we like to use it, travel on it, or whatever it was intended for, but there's a whole story behind that project, okay? A very ugly story. And I'm going to share some of that information with you because that's how I got involved in configuration management. When I started work, I worked for a major transportation agency in New York. What I observed was that every project that they completed was always over budget and over schedule. And they would just fold up the tent and move on to the next project and repeat all the same mistakes. And it just defied me. I just couldn't understand why there was no effort at changing what they were doing to prevent the same things happening over and over. I still haven't gotten an answer to that, but I realized that that's not where the field that I wanted to be in, okay? I worked there for a few years, and then I decided to go out on my own, and I was curious about how to do things differently in this industry. I love this industry, by the way, don't get the wrong idea. But our industry has so much claims and disputes that occur on every single project that bringing in a project on budget and on schedule is unheard of. Our configuration management methodology, again, as I said, it's not a panacea. It's not going to stop and prevent, but it will mitigate. Okay, and I'll explain a little bit about the methodology as we go along. I want to share some information with you to kind of highlight and reinforce my point. Professor Flyberg, a professor from Oxford, who had dedicated a big part of his career towards analyzing projects, and project performance. Okay, I don't know if any of you have heard of that.
Yep, we
Professor? You have?
Yep.
But I would highly recommend that you get a copy of the book and read it and see how it might influence your thinking in terms of you enter this career. You guys are eventually going to be the leaders in these agencies or private sector. But he took 16,000 projects and from 20 different fields and from 136 different countries all around. And what he wanted to know was how many projects came in on budget or better. And it was almost 48% of all the projects came in on budget or better. Okay? But he wanted to analyze it further. He wanted to know how many projects not only came in on budget, but came in on schedule. What do you think was how many projects came in on budget, on schedule, and on benefits?
Less than
Yes.
under 3%.
How much?
Under 3%.
103%?
No, under 3%.
Under 3%?
Yeah.
Anybody else?
I'll take under.
How much?
Under 1.
1. Well, isn't that amazing? Isn't that amazing? Hey, doesn't that kind of make you stop and think, you know, this is our industry. This is the industry we're going to go into. He further studied those projects and wanted to know which were the typical projects that were over budget. Okay? So, he found that rail projects was the number one. They represented over 45%, okay, of being over budget of the group projects that he studied. The next group was bridges and tunnels, and that was 34%. And the final group was road projects, and those were only approximately 20%. And we deal with ourselves mostly in transportation and infrastructure, but this is an indication of the kind of project performance that you're experiencing, okay? Bear in mind what we just saw in terms of projects coming in on budget and on schedule, right? And what is the typical life cycle of creating a contingency on a project, okay? First thing is, when it's in a conceptual stage, you're usually 50% or more because there's so many variables that have not been defined yet, right? Everybody's following me? Yeah. Then the next step in the process is doing preliminary design. And at that point, you're carrying maybe around a 35% because it's a little bit more defined, but still a lot of issues that have not been resolved, right? Then you go into final design. And at final design, you're only carrying about a 15% contingency. In construction, you carry about a 15% contingency. And then, of course, operation and maintenance. And I've never seen, I don't have, maybe, Ken, do you have any information on what the typical contingency is?
After operations and maintenance.
It's just not done that I'm aware of, you know. And that's where a lot of the problems occur. But this is our industry. So I hope that as you are leaders in the industry, you start looking at these things and looking at it different. Why adopt the same standard processes and norms when we know it doesn't work? California high-speed rail. What a doozy. The voter referendum approved it in 2008. The original budget was $33 billion for first phase. The final cost for just the operating system has been $23 billion. The project cost has ballooned to over $100 billion. Finally, the governor stopped the project recently. And so the original schedule for the initial operating system was 2020. The actual schedule for the initial operating system now is 2033, And it's only going to go from Merced to Bakersfield. And originally, it was to go all the way to Sacramento, okay? And the idea was that it was going to be just under 3-hour train ride, as opposed to a 9-hour train ride by Amtrak, okay? Project's gone crazy. And there's just 2 examples of the many, many projects that you can probably pick. The train in Hawaii is another typical example of a project gone totally crazy. Okay. This is a process that I said was developed 75 years ago. And it was developed by the Army, Navy, Air Force back in the 1950s. And the reason that they develop this was because when they were building weapons and aircraft, they kept repeating some of the same mistakes over and over. And this was right after the war. And they decided, hey, let's stop and look at coming up with a process that's going to ensure that you're baselining the information so that you're not repeating the same systems of problems from one prototype to the next. Okay? That was the basic idea. Then in the 1970s, the nuclear industry adopted it because of life safety concerns at nuclear plants. In the 1980s, it was adopted by the information technology because of source code. You know, you write a million lines of code and you're going to make a change or a bug, you got to understand how that line of code interacts with other systems and subsystems within that process. In 1995, it was formalized as an ISO 10007 quality management process. And in 2007, it was adopted by the Project Management Institute. Okay? So it has history and has credibility. Unfortunately, it's just never been adopted by our industry. Some parts of it have been used, but configuration management is just a structured process requiring that configuration identification, change management, and configuration statusing, and audit. The audit is verifying that the change that you're making is in fact achieving what it was intended to do. Okay? All too often we may substitute a material or some component, and we're paying additional for it, but is it achieving what this requires that process be done in a structured, integrated way. Okay? We took this methodology and this process and created a methodology for our industry, which is what I'm going to talk a little bit about. Okay? Now, I came into configuration management after I left and started my company. I was doing research on project performance. It's still my curiosity. There must be something out there. And I came across an article by the Federal Transit Administration, what's called the National Lessons Learned Program certification, which is a certification that the FDA issues on those projects that they have funding. And the project in question was the Los Angeles County Rapid Transit Program. The Rapid Transit Program, during the first segment 1 of the red line. Anybody been on the LA subway system? So the first segment was segment 1 of the red line. They had huge cost overruns and schedule delays. And when they finished it, they went to the federal government and said, hey, it cost me X amount of more money. I want to get the funding for the cost overrun. The federal government said, well, show me and prove me why we should, And they couldn't come up with the justification as to what happened. It was just a project that was not controlled properly. So the agency decided, well, we can't afford this to keep occurring on all the other segments because this is just the first segment. So one of the project control people in the program management group came from the aerospace industry, and he was familiar with configuration management. And he convinced the department to develop a configuration management program to manage the next segment. So segment 2 was managed using configuration management. That was the first time that configuration management was used in our industry. The performance improvement was so dramatic between segment 1 and segment 2 that the federal government gave it a National Lessons Learned Program certification. That program certification included an encouragement that all agencies look at adopting that kind of method. So after reading, I said, this is the Holy Grail. There is hope in our industry. And so I called LA, and I spoke to a fellow named Jeff Christensen, who was the executive director. I said, Jeff, I read about your National Lessons Learned. I'm really curious. I'd like to come out and visit you in LA and learn more about what you guys are doing. And he said, sure. He invited me in. I was there for a week. Did an audit of the system and the processes and how they implemented it. And I took that information and I developed a methodology that we call configuration management, based on the principles of configuration management. Our methodology is based on these processes, okay? And basically what we do is we baseline what the contract is. First thing you have to do is baseline the contract. There are hundreds of submittals. We verify and reconcile the submittal process that are the requirements of that contract. Okay. We also then do a risk management assessment. What are the issues that may impact this project? Okay. And we create a risk register, and we monitor that risk as those risks are resolved or dealt with. We keep an active register going. But we tie it back to the baseline in terms of it has any impact. Then we take any change management. We have a formalized process for documenting changes. What is that change? Who's reviewing, who's approving it? What is the impact that that change is going to have on the baseline or on the project as a whole? Okay. Then we take every Seadrill and we assign a budget to it, because the entire project budget has to tie back to contract deliverables, whether they're specific design submittals or shop drawings or reports that you have to allocate costs to each of the individual components of that project, okay? Because that's the only way you're going to know what is changing in your baseline, okay? And then the document management. And believe me, the document management is not the last step. It's one of the most important steps. Because when it comes to dispute resolution, the only thing that saves you is whoever has the best documentation. Okay? That is the holy grail of our industry. To remember, we are rife with claims and dispute and litigation. That is a huge part of what we do. And all have to deal with on the project. And documentation is the number one source that you can have to help defend your particular decision. Okay. So that's our methodology, practically. Now, what does it do? It provides early identification and accommodates changes, ensure that changes are addressed proactively, minimizing disruption. Because the other thing is, when there's a change, you want to resolve it quickly. Because a claim is an unresolved change. Okay? That's all it is. It's just that you can't agree, and it becomes a claim. And then the claim becomes a dispute. And the dispute becomes litigation. That's the nature of our beast. Clarity and validity of the requirements, maintains clear, concise, and valid requirements to equip the management team with tools to mitigate the impact. And internal feedback and communication mechanism provides a system of checks and balances to ensure that the project and contract performance criteria are consistently met. We talked about the contract dispute, okay? Now, litigation is estimated to occur annually between $1 to $6 billion. Well, that money that could be going towards actual projects as opposed to lawyers, okay? The average value of a dispute in North America grew to $42 million. This continues to rise, okay? Substantial indirect costs such as inefficiency, project delays, and diminished quality. Lost opportunity because it doesn't make good relationships with your clients. So this is the impact that contract disputes has. You know, and what you want to do is try to avoid these things, you know, from both sides. But our industry is, we start out in a very adversarial relationship. You know, when the agency takes on a very adversarial position, and you know, the contractor, he signs the contract, and he's going to hold you to it, you know, and any change you want to make, you know, it's a very difficult industry to work in. We're working right now on the Newark airframe replacement. I won't get into that. But implementing configuration management now. We understand what the methodology consists of, and now, this is typically what happens. You win the contract. You're one of three bidders. They select you. You're celebrating. You know, I tell my client, look, before you sign the notice to proceed, sit down and make sure you understand. Everybody understands what you actually want. Okay, because the reality is that what I've learned is, if you take the contract and you sit down and what we do is we go through the contract and identify all the contract deliverables. And we say, let's say there's 100 deliverables. We sit down with the contractor and he has 80 because he's low bid, right? So, and he's going to interpret things his way, you know. But it's starting a relationship that is based on two people talking two different languages. So eventually, that problem is going to come to a head as you're executing the project. So we say, let's not celebrate yet. Let's make sure we understand. I refer to it as a prenuptial. You know how difficult a prenuptial is? Anybody who got married? It's a very difficult process, but very important because you want to understand each other's position. You know, you want to understand each other's position in terms of what I want and what I intended my contract to say and receive, versus you who bid on this contract and you chose to interpret it your way. Okay? So the first thing you want to do is reconcile the deliverables. We did this on a project not too long ago. We found a discrepancy between the contractor and the agency to the tune of $15 million. That what the owner wanted versus what the contractor bid on, okay? And we had to, fortunately, there was a contingency in there of about $6 million, and we negotiated the differences so that it wound up within the $6 million. But we resolved it up front, okay? If you wait until after the contract is started, it's a totally different situation, okay? We also create a WBS structure for all the contract deliverables and the budgets, and we integrate it with the schedule, okay? There has to be the contractor has to turn in the master baseline schedule. What we want to make sure is that the master baseline schedule is tied in with the cost, because that is your baseline. So A deliverable has a dollar value, and change to that, then you're changing that baseline. But you want to be able to trace back every change to every baseline item. Okay, that's critical. And then we automate the deliverables on workflows. So we pre-assign workflows for each contract deliverable up front. So let's say if there were 100 deliverables, we create 100 workflows defining who, what, and where. So even if people change from the project team, it's already set up. You just continue to sit in and move it to the next step. Okay? And you have to have some sort of software that's compliant. Okay, that's important. Now, you see the handshake? This all sounds so simple, right? Try to get it done. That's why I've been at this for 25 years, and with limit, I can count on one hand the number of times that I've been successful in truly implementing configuration management based on my methodology. So this is how we do the master serial list. We identify the frequency, what the deliverable is, the WBS, the date that it's due, number of times that it's due, who has to sign off on it, and everything. It breaks it down to the most elemental level. But that's the way you're executing the project. Problem is, people don't want to be held accountable. They want to do things on their own, and that's when everything starts going wrong. You can't do that. But, again, and then this is the integration between the baseline schedule and the schedule list. They have to be integrated. You can't have a schedule saying one thing and your schedule list saying something else. So, again, it's speaking the same language from all sides. And this is a sample of the workflows. This is for a project we're doing in New Jersey, and we set up for each of the deliverables a workflow. Okay? And then that way, it automatically captures the date that it was received. So is it compliant with what the serial list said? And was it completed when it was supposed to? And you lock it up. And the beauty of it, there was a client that I had, and he was a designer, and I was working for the client. And he was fighting me to implement the methodology. And I said, don't you understand that if you have 50 deliverables, and you complete those deliverables, and we close them, and you get paid. Right? So why are you arguing with me? This is for your own benefit, until that's when the light bulb went off in his head. Finally realized, yeah, I have 50 deliverables, that's what I signed up for. So when I close out the 50th deliverable, I get my final payment. No questions, no dispute. Anyway. With that, I hope that you found this interesting and informative, and I count on you being change agents, okay? Our industry needs it.
I think this is very topical because one of the classes that we had, we talked about the keys to success. Well, how do you set yourself up for success of a project, right? In the planning phase, all the things that, I talked about the first week about how mega projects go way over schedule, way over budget. Talked about why projects go off the rails, why there are problems. But you see a methodology like this, you say, this makes all the sense in the world. But it doesn't get done. So when you look at your projects and you look at the projects that you're going to study, ask them about things like this. How are you doing this? How are you aligning deliverables with your schedule, with your budget, to make sure everyone's aligned? Did you do a check with the contractor before you issued notice to proceed, just to see if everyone was aligned as far as expectations go? This work is complicated enough. We want to manage expectations. We want to align expectations. And what did we say one of the 4 mindsets of managing a large capital project was? You want to make everyone successful, right? You want to make everyone successful. This isn't about you losing so I can win, or vice versa. So the more that you can adopt systems and methodologies like this, I think the better. So let's take a couple of questions. They just want to go right to your talent acquisition people, I think, Eric.
Sure.
WBS again?
WBS? What's the question?
Well, I see that on 2 slides before, there's
I'm having trouble hearing.
WBS. I think it's within the configuration management.
It's basically how you plan to execute a project. and the various steps that you have to go through to execute that.
So, from what you've described, obviously, it seems like you're very, and obviously the history of the United States, you do, working with public organizations, you do a lot of design, bid, build projects. I'm curious, your experience, your methodology, does it work better, I'm assuming, in design build? Have you worked on design build projects as it's become more in vogue?
Look, what's the latest flavor of the month? Progressive?
Progressive.
It's the people. It doesn't matter which delivery method. One delivery method applies to a particular approach to a project, and a different, you could go back to your traditional design, bid, build, or your design, build, but it's the people. That's what I think. It comes, it's that reconciliation of that structure, that approach, that prenuptial. That's where it comes down to. It doesn't matter which delivery approach you use.
So you find equally, as from a business perspective, that you're integrated fully, just as your projects in DB versus DBB are similarly successful.
I would say we've done it on design build, and we've done it on traditional projects, and we've just done it on design. We've done an autopsy at the Port Authority. And the problem that I find is that the agency doesn't want to pay for it. Everything, our industry is low bid. And if you're on the consultant side, it's razor thin profit margin. Okay? So if I win the contract and I have to spend the money doing something that I'm not going to get reimbursed by the agency, I'm hesitant to do it. Okay? That's part of the problem of the mindset. They don't see the benefit that they provide by investing in technology and processes and systems, because they think only in terms of dollars and cents. Some projects, depending on the nature of the project and how quickly it has to be operational and to use, design build may be the preferred approach. Others, if it's, I think how many have read the book? None? He says, start slow, finish fast. Because the problem is we start fast and then we finish slow. And that's what causes the, So spend it, he has an example of a couple of projects, particularly the Empire State Building, which was done under budget and under schedule. Okay? But it goes into the practical aspects of really investing and understanding what it is. I showed you the case study of the California high-speed rail. A great idea, and that's just one of many case studies,
How are you leveraging the power of data and AI into Paco Group?
Yes, we have been dealing with data analysis to help us make better informed decisions. By the way, I forgot to, before I come back, but we have on our website podcasts. So on configuration management, project risk, AI, and its impact on construction. So go to our website and go to the blog area and you'll see some of our podcasts. It's still in the early stages. We're more focused in helping us understand how to do better business. Our talent acquisition person is responsible for recording and capturing the information so that we can analyze how are we being successful in the recruitment process. Ever since COVID, the landscape has changed dramatically. For us to recruit is very difficult. People only want hybrid schedules, assuming that they're willing to come in for a couple of days. They didn't want to work from home. And finding people is a task. So anybody who's a scheduler, or estimator, who's in the room, if you don't mind my recruiting, see Marvin and get we're in a tough market, but we're constantly recruiting. We have a lot of quality contracts that we have to provide staff augmentation to various agencies. But yeah, we're looking. We've converted a couple of years ago to a centralized database based on NetSuite, and we're looking at attaching an AI application to it, and we capture all our opportunity pursuits, proposals through the entire life cycle to see what our hit ratio is, and we have KPIs for each of our business process. Anything else?
One more?
I actually have a follow-up question.
Sure.
I've never interacted with the CEO/founder of a company, and as a student, coming into the industry, what were some challenges that you faced when you first created your company?
What was the
Some challenges that you faced when you first created your company, and advice you can give.
capital?
Okay.
Yeah, I took my savings, and I joked because when I started, I left the agency I was working at, and I decided to go out on my own. And I had to use my savings to be the income source until I got a contract. But then I was trying to grow the company, so the first couple of years I just worked as a sole source. I could only work on a project, and I didn't have time to build the company. And then I had to make a decision to cut my time. So I cut the contract back to about 50%, so I could spend 50% building, because I had to do invoices and marketing and proposals, and that lasted for a couple of years. And then I got another contract that I could hire people, to work on, and that gave me a little bit. And then I finished the 50% contract that I was working on and devoted 100% to the marketing, business development activities. And that was 36 years ago. Yeah. We had an office in Colombia, South America. We've worked in Panama. We've worked in Spain, Trinidad, Tobago, Puerto Rico. We're working in Puerto Rico right now. And throughout the United States we've worked.
Great.
And Tim and I, we met when he was at AECOM. He was the global program management person. And I went to talk to him about configuration management.
I tried a lot in Puerto Rico.
Yeah.
That's great. Well, Frank, this has been great. Thank you so much.